How could one man become both the deadliest weapon of the Greeks and the shadow of his own legend? The shores of Troy echo with the clash of shields, the cries of warriors, and in the glow of burning fires, one name resounds through the ages, Achilles. Tonight, let this epic of glory and fate carry you gently into sleep. Settle in, breathe deeply, and welcome to Twilight Tales. Chapter 1. The Child of Destiny. Part 1. Birth and Prophecy. In the shadow of ancient skies, when the gods still shaped the fates of men, a prophecy resounded like an immutable echo. A child would be born, son of a goddess and a mortal, and he would carry within him both glory and tragedy. That child was Achilles, but before he came into the world, an extraordinary union had to take place, that of Thetis, the Nereid with a body of sea foam and azure eyes, and Peleus, king of the Myrmidons, a mere mortal chosen by the gods. The story begins long before the birth. Zeus, the master of Olympus, had gazed upon Thetis's beauty, but a fearsome oracle had foretold that the son of the goddess would surpass his father in power. Fearing that such an heir might one day overthrow his reign, Zeus renounced his desire to seduce her and decided to marry her to a mortal man. Thus, Thetis was promised to Peleus, a hero renowned for his valor, but who, in the face of divine will, could only accept his fate. The wedding was celebrated with a magnificence worthy of the gods themselves. All the Olympians were present. Poseidon, radiant as the raging sea, Hera in her immaculate robe, Athena, whose eyes gleamed with the brilliance of martial wisdom. The muses sang, the cups overflowed with nectar, and the guests savored divine feasts. Yet a shadow disrupted the celebration. Eris, the goddess of discord, had not been invited. Furious, she cast a golden apple inscribed with the words, "To the fairest," into the midst of the assembly. This seemingly trivial act sparked an immortal quarrel among Hera, Aphrodite, and Athena. From this discord would later arise the Trojan War, a war at the heart of which Achilles would become the most illustrious of warriors. Thus, even before his first cry, his destiny was already tied to the clash of arms. When Thetis and Peleus were finally united, the sea bore witness to their forced but sacred love. From this union, a child was to be born, and his coming was preceded by mysterious dreams. In the temples, priests interpreted the flames of sacrifices. Some saw the silhouette of a young man surrounded by light. Others foresaw a short but blazing life, like a meteor. Prophets, augurs, and simple soothsayers all repeated the same certainty. From this union will be born the greatest of warriors, but his glory will be sealed by an early death. Thetis, in her maternal heart, trembled before this destiny. She had wished for her son a peaceful existence, far from spears and shields, but the gods left little room for the choices of mortals, or even immortals. She knew her child would be summoned by glory, drawn to the tumult of battles. For the prophecy was clear, Achilles could choose a long life in obscurity or a radiant youth etched in eternity. Thetis's pregnancy was surrounded by celestial signs. Sailors recounted that the sea grew strangely calm when she bathed on the shore. Dolphins came to dance around her, and the winds fell silent to listen to her song. It was said that even the moon paused in its course to gaze upon the radiant beauty of the pregnant goddess. Every omen announced that this child would belong neither wholly to the world of men nor to that of the gods. The birth took place in Peleus's palace in the heart of Thessaly. The Myrmidons, a loyal and warlike people, held their breath awaiting the arrival of the heir. The night was calm, but in the distance lightning streaked the horizon, as if Zeus himself marked the moment with his seal. When Achilles came into the world, his cry pierced the silence with the power of nascent thunder. It is said that even the palace walls trembled, and the priests of Dodona heard the echo deep within their sacred sanctuary. The newborn child already possessed something singular. His eyes shone with a clear brilliance, as if the sea and sky were reflected in them at once. His skin bore the radiance of a rare purity, and in his gaze a fierce energy was already evident. The sages of the kingdom bowed before him. Here is the one who will mark history, whose name will cross the centuries. But in Thetis's heart, anxiety lingered. She knew that this gift of power was also a curse. She resolved to do everything to protect her son from the death foretold by the oracle. Already, in the palace corridors, whispers spread that the goddess was preparing a mysterious ritual. Some claimed she intended to plunge the child into sacred fire to make him immortal. Others that she considered bathing him in the waters of the Styx, the river of the underworld, whose currents bestowed fearsome invulnerability. This rumor soon became truth, for Thetis, unwilling to resign herself to Achilles' doomed fate, would make a radical decision to defy the prophecy. But this choice, like all things involving gods and men, would have its limits, already preparing the sole flaw of the invincible hero, that small heel by which she would hold him during the ritual, which would remain vulnerable. Thus, in the first moments of his life, Achilles was already placed at the crossroads of divine and human forces, between blessing and tragedy. His birth was not merely an arrival into the world, but the dawn of a destiny that would shake the balance of kingdoms, seal the fall of Troy, and etch his name in humanity's eternal memory. Part 2. The Baptism in the Styx. In the silence of ancient nights, as the stars shone like the eyes of gods watching the earth, Thetis, Achilles' mother, could not find sleep. Since her son's birth, her heart, torn between love and anguish, beat to the rhythm of growing unease. The augurs had been clear. Achilles would bear immense glory, but his life would be brief. For an immortal mother, the thought of watching her child perish in the prime of youth was an unbearable pain. Thetis refused to resign herself. She, the Nereid born of the waves, daughter of Nereus and Doris, had already witnessed countless destinies shattered, countless heroes felled by wars and divine curses. But her son, she would protect at all costs, even against the will of the gods themselves. Thus, in the secrecy of her dreams, she devised a daring plan to grant Achilles an invulnerability no mortal had ever possessed. Accounts vary on how she undertook this quest. Some claimed she first considered plunging him into the flames of the hearth, burning away his mortal parts to leave only immortal essence. But Peleus, discovering his wife holding the child above the flames, was horrified and stopped her. So Thetis, guided by a deeper intuition, turned to the sacred waters of the Styx, the river of the underworld, that dark and dreaded stream feared by all living beings. The Styx was no ordinary river. It wound through the shadows of Hades' realm, bordered by black rocks and icy mists. Its waters held a unique power. They bound the oaths of the gods themselves. Anyone who swore by the Styx was condemned to uphold their vow under penalty of eternal punishment. But the river also possessed another secret and terrible virtue. Whoever was immersed in it would see their body become invulnerable, protected from any weapon. One night, when the palace was asleep, Thetis took her son in her arms and left the royal dwelling. Her steps led her to a forbidden place where only immortals could hope to venture. It is said she descended into secret caves, through fissures opened in the heart of Thessaly, until she reached a passage leading to the subterranean realm. There, in the cold glow of eternal torches, she felt the presence of wandering souls, heard the moans of the damned, and glimpsed in the distance the dark and silent flow of the Styx. The scene was solemn, the darkness thickened, the waters pulsed like a somber heart, and a chilling breath swept through the air. Achilles, still an infant, stirred faintly in his mother's arms, unaware that he was about to become the instrument of a ritual that would mark his destiny forever. Thetis leaned over the river. She prayed to the deities of the depths, invoked Hades and Persephone, then beseeched the mysterious forces of the Styx to protect her child. She held him firmly by the ankle, his small heel slipping between her fingers, and with a steady gesture, she plunged his entire body into the dark waters. The river, cold as death at first, enveloped Achilles in a strange glow. The child did not cry. On the contrary, an almost sacred silence accompanied his immersion, as if even the shadows respected the moment. The Styx, recognizing an exceptional being in him, closed around his skin and rendered it invulnerable. When Thetis lifted him from the waters, Achilles shone with a new radiance. His flesh was no longer that of a mere mortal. No weapon could pierce it, no iron could wound it, no flame could consume it. Yet, in this heroic act, a detail escaped her maternal vigilance. The ankle she held tightly between her fingers, that tiny point by which she grasped her son, was not bathed by the Styx. That heel, insignificant in appearance, would remain vulnerable. But Thetis, at that moment, was unaware of this. To her, her son had received the greatest of gifts, the ability to escape human fragility. Back at the palace, she kept the secret. Only the gods knew what she had accomplished, and they observed with curiosity this new mortal who had become almost invincible. Some, like Hera, wondered what role this young boy would play in divine plans. Others, like Athena, sensed he would become a hero whose name would echo through the ages. But a darker voice, that of Apollo, already whispered that this flaw left by Thetis, that fragile heel, would one day be the key to his downfall. Time passed, and Achilles grew without knowing the secret of his invulnerability. To the Myrmidons he was simply the heir of King Peleus, a child with a sharp gaze and a remarkably robust body. But in Thetis's eyes, he was more than a son. He was a promise. She knew he would carry the glory of men higher than any before him, but she also knew a tragic fate clung to him like a shadow. In the temples, priests continued to proclaim the prophecy. This child will be the greatest of warriors, but his name will shine all the brighter for falling early. Mothers, hearing this, prayed for their own sons, fearing their lives might one day be cut down by the sword of this invincible young hero. Thus, Achilles already bore the mark of his future. His invulnerable flesh, his fragile heel, and his mother's fierce determination to shield him from death formed the first elements of the legend. The Styx had given him an invisible armor, but that armor was not complete, and as always in the tales of heroes, a single small flaw was enough for destiny to be fulfilled. The world did not yet know that one day thousands of men would remember this tiny detail, that an arrow, guided by a god, would find that precise point, and thus the greatest of warriors would fall. But for now, the child grew, and his destiny remained in gestation like a storm that had not yet broken. In Thetis's arms, emerging from the ritual, Achilles slept peacefully. She, the goddess of the waves, caressed his brow in silence, convinced she had given her son a chance to escape death's grasp. She could not know that, in that night in the underworld, she had sealed both his invincibility and his vulnerability, his heroic immortality and his certain death. Part 3. The Education by Chiron. The years passed, and young Achilles, now protected by the dark waters of the Styx, grew up in Thessaly, under the watchful eyes of his parents. From his earliest years, his boundless energy and strength astonished those around him. Barely a child, he ran faster than the other boys in the palace, lifted stones none of his peers could budge, and his laughter rang out like a victorious song. But Thetis knew these gifts were not enough. If her son was to fulfill the prophesied destiny, he needed a mentor worthy of him, a guide who could channel his inner fire and make him a complete hero. Thus, she entrusted Achilles to the wisest and most respected of tutors, Chiron, the immortal centaur. Chiron was no ordinary being. Unlike other centaurs known for their brutality and drunken violence, he embodied wisdom, moderation, and knowledge. Son of the Titan Kronos and the nymph Philyra, he had inherited a noble nature and exceptional intelligence. His dwelling, located on Mount Pelion, was a place of learning where young heroes destined to mark history gathered. Jason, the future leader of the Argonauts, had received his teachings. Heracles himself had learned certain virtues from him. And now it was Achilles' turn to climb the slopes of that sacred mountain. The day of departure was solemn. Peleus, proud but moved, handed his son over to the centaur. Thetis, her heart heavy, prayed to the gods to protect the child during his training. Achilles, still young, did not fully grasp the importance of this moment, but his eyes shone with fierce impatience. He was leaving the comfort of the palace to discover the rugged and grandiose world of Mount Pelion. Under Chiron's tutelage, Achilles' life took a new form. Each day began at dawn, when golden light brushed the peaks. The centaur, standing tall in his imposing stature, woke his pupil and led him into the woods. There, Achilles learned to run barefoot over stones and roots, to cross icy torrents, to climb steep slopes without faltering. Chiron repeated tirelessly, "A hero must be stronger than the earth itself, for it is from it that he draws his power." Little by little, Achilles developed unmatched endurance. He ran faster than the wind, leaped like a deer, and his steps resounded with a lightness that astonished even his master. Some said he had inherited his mother's speed, born of the sea's waves, and that his invulnerable body knew no limits. But Chiron's education was not limited to physical strength. The centaur was a sage, a healer, and a musician. In the evenings, when the sun vanished behind the mountains, he taught Achilles the secrets of medicinal plants. Together, they roamed the forests to gather herbs and roots. Yarrow, later named after him, capable of closing wounds. Mandrake, mysterious and powerful. St. John's wort, which soothed pain. Chiron showed him how to prepare balms and poultices, how to heal the wounds of men and beasts. Achilles, attentive, absorbed everything. For a hero must not only deal death, he must also know how to preserve life. To these skills were added the arts. Chiron, taking up his lyre, sang of the exploits of gods and ancient heroes. Achilles, captivated, listened to tales of Heracles, Perseus, or Bellerophon facing the Chimera. But soon he learned to pluck the strings himself, to sing in a clear voice hymns dedicated to Apollo. His mother, who sometimes visited, wept with joy hearing her son play music, for she saw in it the echo of a tender humanity amidst a warlike destiny. The art of combat, however, remained the core of his training. Chiron taught him mastery of weapons, first the bow, making him a shooter of fearsome precision, then the spear, which became a natural extension of his arm. Young Achilles wielded the shield with skill, struck with a sword faster than lightning, and his agile body dodged blows as if dancing. The centaur, admiring, recognized in him an extraordinary talent, a flame no other pupil had ever possessed with such intensity. But Chiron was not only shaping a warrior, he wanted to forge a just man capable of reflection. He taught Achilles temperance, self-control, and the importance of honor. Yet he already sensed in him a passionate, ardent, sometimes uncontrollable nature. Even as a child, Achilles was quick to anger. He could not tolerate injustice, and his pride, sharp as a blade, could drive him to violent outbursts. Chiron knew that this temperament, both strength and weakness, would one day seal his fate. In the long winter evenings, master and pupil gazed at the starry sky. Chiron pointed out the constellations, recounting how each star bore the memory of a hero or a god. "Look," he said, "up there lie the keys to your future. One day your name will shine in that sky, for your glory will never die. But remember, it is not strength alone that makes a man immortal, but the honor he leaves behind." These words resonated in the young boy's heart. Achilles began to understand that his destiny would not be merely to conquer or rule, but to embody an eternal memory. The years passed thus, marked by the centaur's teachings. Achilles became an adolescent, tall, swift, beautiful as a god. His training companions feared and admired him in equal measure. Rumors of his strength already spread through Greece. It was said no one his age could resist him, that his arm felled wild boars with a single blow, and that his voice made older warriors tremble. When the time came to leave Mount Pelion, Achilles was no longer a child. He was a young man forged by nature and Chiron's wisdom, a being both invincible and fragile, ardent and noble. His master watched him depart, knowing his pupil would soon write the most famous pages of the Iliad. Chiron, the immortal sage, knew he would not see this young hero again without thinking of the prophecy that loomed over him like a shadow. Thus ended Achilles' education, a fundamental chapter of his legend. In the memory of men, it would be remembered that he was trained by the greatest of tutors, and that this education made him the archetype of the Greek hero, swift, invincible, but driven by a passion that would one day consume his life. Chapter 2. The Hero's Choice. Part 1. The Call to War. The years of training with Chiron had ended, and Achilles, now an adolescent, returned to Peleus's palace. The king, proud of his son, saw in him a formidable heir, but he could not imagine that soon the entire world would invoke his name. For far from the mountains of Thessaly, a quarrel was already brewing, destined to set all of Greece ablaze and draw Achilles into the most famous of wars, the Trojan War. It all began with the dispute among the goddesses. On that wedding day, many years earlier, when Eris's golden apple was cast among the guests, a conflict took root. Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite, all claiming the title of fairest, asked Zeus to judge them. But the master of Olympus, fearing their wrath, delegated the task to a mortal, Paris, Prince of Troy. Each goddess tried to seduce him. Hera promised power, Athena wisdom and victory, while Aphrodite offered the love of the most beautiful woman in the world. Paris chose Aphrodite. That woman was none other than Helen, wife of King Menelaus of Sparta. Her abduction, or flight depending on the accounts, provoked unprecedented outrage. Menelaus, humiliated, called upon his brother Agamemnon, king of Mycenae. Together they summoned all the princes and kings of Greece, invoking the ancient oath of Helen's suitors. Each had sworn to defend the honor of the chosen marriage. Thus, an unparalleled expedition was prepared, a fleet destined to besiege Troy and bring Helen back by force. In every city, warriors were recruited. Messengers roamed mountains, valleys, and ports to gather the most illustrious champions. Odysseus, king of Ithaca, was torn from his retreat despite his cunning. Ajax of Salamis, immense and powerful, answered the call, and soon another name was remembered, Achilles, son of Peleus, prince of the Myrmidons, whose youth already promised to rival the heroes of old. But Thetis, who knew the prophecy, dreaded this moment. She knew that if her son went to Troy, He would choose the path of glory, but he would lose his life. So to protect him, she devised a ruse to hide Achilles so the Greek recruiters could not find him. She took her son to the island of Skyros, to the court of King Lycomedes. There, Achilles was disguised among the palace's girls, dressed in women's clothing like a young princess of the court. To all eyes, he was no longer a warrior in the making, but a maiden with a lively gaze and graceful bearing. Some even say he took the name Peril, the red-haired, because of his fiery locks. But destiny always finds its paths. Agamemnon, determined to gather all the heroes, sent Odysseus in search of the young man. The king of Ithaca, master of cunning, was not fooled. He went to Skyros, mingled with the women of the palace, and presented gifts to the young girls, sparkling jewels, precious fabrics, but also a spear and a shield. As they admired the adornments, only one hand reached for the weapons with instinctive eagerness. Achilles's. The mask fell immediately. Odysseus, triumphant, revealed the young hero's identity. Destiny had caught up with him. Faced with the call to war, Achilles hesitated. On one hand, his mother's words still echoed, "If you go, you will die young." On the other, his heart burned with a thirst for action. Since childhood, he had been told he was born to be the greatest of warriors. Could he refuse the chance to etch his name in eternity? It was then that the prophecy was recalled to him in all its clarity. He had two possible fates: a long, obscure life, ignored by glory but peaceful, or a short life, blazing, forever inscribed in the memory of men. Achilles chose without trembling. "Better an immortal glory than a lusterless oblivion," he declared. Thus, he left Skyros and rejoined his father Peleus. Despite the pain of seeing his son march toward a foretold death, Peleus could only arm him with his blessings. He entrusted Achilles with an army of Myrmidons, fierce and loyal warriors, renowned for their discipline and courage. These men swore to follow their young prince to the end. On the day of departure, the Aegean Sea glittered under the light of torches. Hundreds of ships gathered, forming a vast fleet ready to sail to Asia Minor. On the docks, warriors sharpened their weapons, leaders discussed strategies, and priests sacrificed bulls to the gods for favorable winds. Achilles, standing at the prow of his ship, gazed at the horizon. Beside him stood Patroclus, his dearest friend, a brother in heart and battle, who had chosen to accompany him. The Myrmidons, disciplined, awaited his signal. Amid the tumult of preparations, one certainty prevailed. Without Achilles, the war would not be the same. Thus began the great adventure. The gods themselves watched the fleet depart from Greece, Hera and Athena burning with hatred for Troy, Aphrodite protecting her favored Paris, Zeus observing the balance of forces. All knew Achilles' role would be decisive, and already, in the dreams of some, the image of the young hero appeared, swift as the wind, charging across the battlefield, sowing death among his enemies. The sea carried these visions like a promise. The Trojan War would not merely be a conflict of kings and cities, but the stage where Achilles' destiny would be fulfilled. The call to war had sounded, Achilles had answered, and now Nothing could stop him from marching toward his glory and his death. Part 2. The Dilemma of Glory. The Greek fleet had left its ports in a grandiose tumult, carrying with it the hope and fury of an unprecedented expedition. Hundreds of white sails rose over the Aegean Sea, swelled by favorable winds. The cries of rowers, the songs of warriors, and the crash of waves accompanied this march into the unknown. But behind this heroic fervor in Achilles' heart, a question burned as brightly as the rising sun. What path would he forge between glory and life? Since childhood, he had known the prophecy. Oracles, priests, and his own mother never ceased to remind him that two fates lay before him: a long, peaceful life, but doomed to oblivion, or a short, dazzling life, forever inscribed in the memory of men. Achilles, now embarked for Troy, found himself face to face with this dilemma, each wave seeming to remind him of this irrevocable choice. Aboard his ship, surrounded by the Myrmidons, he remained silent. His companions, confident, saw in him a leader already crowned with greatness. But he, in the secrecy of his thoughts, weighed every word of the prophecy. Could he truly accept dying young, far from his homeland, for a woman he did not even know? Was this the price of honor? Patroclus, his closest friend, sensed this hesitation. One night, as the fleet halted on an island to resupply, he sat beside Achilles by the fire. The stars glittered above them, a reflection of the gods watching their conversation. "You are troubled," Patroclus said softly. "Are you thinking of the prophecy?" "How could I not?" Achilles replied. "All speak of me as the greatest of warriors. But what good is this glory if I must die before my hair turns white? Is it an enviable fate to live only half a life? And if that half-life were worth more than 1,000 obscure lives," Patroclus countered. "You were chosen, Achilles. You were not born to remain in the shadows. Even if your flame is brief, it will illuminate the centuries." These words echoed long in Achilles' heart. Patroclus, without realizing it, had reminded him of what already burned within him, an insatiable thirst for greatness, a refusal to be an ordinary man. The dilemma was not only within him, but also in the heavens. The gods, observing his journey, debated his future. Zeus, on his shining throne, saw in him a force to be managed carefully. Hera and Athena, eager for vengeance against Troy, hoped his presence would ensure the Greeks' victory. Aphrodite, meanwhile, knew her protege Paris would inevitably cross his path. Each awaited the moment when Achilles, through a choice or an action, would tip the scales of the war. The dilemma took on another dimension when they landed at Aulis, the rallying point for the Achaean armies. There, Agamemnon, supreme leader of the expedition, gathered the kings and heroes. He spoke of the oath made long ago for Helen, their collective duty to avenge the affront, and the promise of unparalleled glory. Before the assembly, Achilles, still very young, felt all eyes upon him. His gaze met those of Ajax, massive and powerful, Odysseus, cunning and penetrating, Menelaus, burning with anger. All seemed to expect him to speak, to affirm his commitment. And he spoke. His clear voice resounded through the camp. I did not come for Helen, nor for your quarrels of kings. I came because my destiny is written. If the gods wish me to be the greatest of warriors, then it is at Troy that I will find this glory. I care little for the length of my life, as long as my name survives my death." These words were met with cries of enthusiasm. The warriors cheered this young prince who, barely out of adolescence, dared to defy destiny openly. But Thetis, watching her son from the waves, wept in silence. She understood that his choice was already sealed. Yet the dilemma never fully left Achilles. Even after affirming his decision, it returned to his thoughts. Sometimes he imagined a different life, staying in Thessaly, ruling the Myrmidons, knowing the love of a wife, watching his children grow. But each time, this peaceful vision faded before the brilliance of the visions that haunted him, himself, charging at the head of armies, his name shouted by future generations, his statue raised in temples, his exploits sung by poets. In his heart, the balance always tipped toward glory. An omen came to confirm this choice. As the fleet resumed its journey, an eagle appeared in the sky, clutching a serpent in its talons. The seers interpreted the sign. The eagle is Achilles, swift and invincible. The serpent is Troy, which will fall in his grasp. But the eagle, in seizing its prey, will itself be wounded. Murmurs spread through the ranks. It was a warning, but also a promise. Thus, over the days Achilles ceased to struggle against his dilemma. He accepted it as an immutable truth. He would die young, but his name would be immortal. And this certainty, far from frightening him, became a source of energy. For if every moment could be his last, then every moment must be radiant. In the nights that followed, Patroclus saw him smile under the stars. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "I think," Achilles replied, "that the gods may envy us, for they live eternally, but we have the chance to shine in brevity. I will die young, yes, but I will have lived 1,000 lives in one." Thus, Achilles, son of Thetis and Peleus, definitively chose his path. Not the safety of oblivion, but the brilliance of memory. And already the sea carrying the ships toward Troy resounded like a funereal and glorious drum, announcing that the destiny of the greatest of heroes was in motion. Part 3. The Embarkation for Troy. The decision was made. The dilemma was resolved. Achilles had chosen glory over longevity. From then on, every gesture, every breath of his existence was directed toward Troy. The young prince was no longer merely the heir of the Myrmidons. He was becoming the living flame of a war that would set 2 worlds ablaze. On the coasts of Thessaly, the Myrmidons prepared to follow their master. Peleus, despite the weight of the prophecy, rallied his people and ordered the fleet to set sail. Ships were repaired, hulls coated with pitch, and white sails raised, soon to bear the mark of the wind. The Myrmidons, fierce warriors, sharpened their spears, polished their shields, and etched symbols of their loyalty onto their helmets. They knew their young king would lead them into a perilous endeavor, but none considered turning back. Peleus, aware of the moment's significance, entrusted his son with precious weapons. a spear forged by the gods, inherited from his ancestor Aeacus, capable of piercing any armor. It was said this weapon had been blessed by Athena herself, and only Achilles' hand could wield it. The king also gave him a gleaming shield, adorned with motifs of the sea, the stars, and the winds, as if to remind his son that the entire cosmos was watching his destiny. But even more precious was the advice Peleus gave him. Holding Achilles by the shoulders, he said, "My son, you were born for glory, and no one can escape what the gods have written. But remember that glory has meaning only if guided by honor. Be a just leader, protect your companions, respect the gods. Let your strength serve memory, not cruelty." These words took root in Achilles' heart, though his fiery temperament would later lead him to forget them in his rages. At dawn, the Myrmidons embarked. Drums resounded, setting the rhythm for the rowers. The ships, aligned like an army of sea falcons, launched onto the Aegean Sea. The wind filled the sails, and foam burst at the prows. Achilles, standing at the prow of his ship, gazed at the horizon with ardent eyes. Beside him stood Patroclus, his soul brother, who had sworn never to abandon him. Their bond, already unbreakable, grew stronger in the face of the battles to come. The journey to Troy was not a mere crossing, it was a sacred procession. Priests offered sacrifices to Poseidon to calm the waves, and hymns to Apollo rang out on the decks. Each island passed became a stop to replenish water and supplies, but also where seers scrutinized omens. Birds in the sky, the color of the waves, the direction of the wind, all were interpreted as signs from the gods. One evening, as the sun sank below the horizon, Achilles had a strange dream. In it, he ran on a beach, his swift steps kicking up sand like flames, but each time he approached the sea, a massive wave pushed him back, preventing him from reaching the water. In the distance, he saw a shining city, Troy, its walls gleaming like gold. He reached out to seize it, but the wave returned again and again. When he awoke, drenched in sweat, he recalled his mother's words, "Your destiny will be glorious, but always tied to death." This dream strengthened his resolve. He understood he could not escape Troy. During the voyage, he grew closer to the other Greek leaders. Ajax, the immense warrior, saw in him a rival, but also an ally. Odysseus, ever cunning, measured the young prince's fervor and already considered that his anger might need tempering. Agamemnon, leader of the expedition, welcomed Achilles with a certain jealousy. He sensed that the young hero's glory might eclipse his own. Between them, a silent tension was already forming, a harbinger of future conflicts. One episode particularly marked the journey. As the fleet neared the coasts of Asia Minor, a sudden storm arose. The winds howled, waves engulfed the ships, and the rowers struggled to hold their course. Many feared the gods had withdrawn their favor, but Achilles, unshaken, stood at the prow and raised his arms to the sky. He invoked his grandfather Nereus and his mother Thetis, beseeching the marine deities to calm the waters. Immediately, it is said, the waves stilled and the sky cleared. The Greeks saw this as a sign. Achilles was truly the chosen of the gods. Finally, after weeks of navigation, the Greek fleet came within sight of the Trojan coast. The legendary city's walls rose in the distance, majestic, impregnable, defying both the sea and men. The warriors on the decks gazed at the spectacle with a mix of exhilaration and dread. Each knew this siege would be long, bloody, and that many would never see their homeland again. Achilles felt a different kind of exhilaration. Before him opened the arena where he would inscribe his name forever. His fingers tightened on the shaft of his spear. His eyes blazed. Behind him, the Myrmidons chanted his name, ready to follow him to the end. Patroclus, placing a hand on his shoulder, said simply, "Here it is, Achilles. Your destiny begins." And in the crash of waves, oars, and drums, the Greek fleet finally landed on the beaches of Troy. The sand became the threshold of a war that would last 10 years, and where every gesture of Achilles would forever mark the human epic. Chapter 3. The Wrath of Achilles. Part 1. The Affront with Agamemnon. The sands of the Trojan beaches had become the land of the Greeks. Hundreds of tents lined the coast, forming a city of canvas and wood. The ships were drawn up on the shore, standing like a silent army ready to take to the sea again. For months, the Achaeans, sons of Atreus, kings, princes, and warriors, had besieged Troy without breaking its walls. The war dragged on in skirmishes, heroic duels, and raids on Troy's allied cities. Achilles, leading his Myrmidons, was already distinguished by his fervor. His charges were irresistible, his blows lightning fast, and the Trojans trembled at the thought of crossing him. His name passed from mouth to mouth, and the shadow of his silhouette frightened even the bravest. But this glory, so radiant, was soon to clash with the pride of another, Agamemnon, king of Mycenae, supreme leader of the expedition. The opportunity arose when a plague struck the Greek camp. Apollo, angered by an affront to one of his priests, had loosed his invisible arrows on the Achaean soldiers. The sick fell by the dozens. The flames of funeral pyres rose daily, and fear gripped the ranks. The leaders gathered in council to find a way to appease the offended god. Calchas, the seer, stood up. His voice, grave and hesitant, spoke the truth. Apollo will not cease his anger until Chryseis, the daughter of the priest Chryses, is returned to her father without ransom. Chryseis was Agamemnon's prize. At these words, the king of Mycenae paled with rage. The idea of giving up his prize, of obeying a god and a seer, seemed an unbearable humiliation. He railed against Calchas, against Apollo, against all who dared dictate his conduct. But the plague worsened, and under pressure from the other leaders, he was forced to yield. Agamemnon returned Chryseis to her father, but his wounded pride sought vengeance. Before the assembly of kings, he hurled venomous words. "Let no one think Agamemnon will remain without a prize. If I give up this captive, I will take another's in exchange, perhaps yours, Achilles, if I so decide." These words fell like thunderbolts. Achilles, until then seated among the leaders, leaped up in fury. His eyes blazed with a burning flame, and his voice, rumbling, made the assembly tremble. "Dog with a brazen face, you who call yourself leader of the Achaeans, dare to threaten me, Achilles, the most valiant of your warriors. It is for you that we fight, for you that our ships cross the sea, and you would strip me of my honor? The affront was launched. Agamemnon, inflamed by his own anger, responded with violence. Yes, I swear it. If I am deprived of my prize, I will take yours with my own hands. You will see if I am the master of the Achaeans. Silence fell over the assembly. Everyone felt this was no ordinary quarrel, but a rift capable of breaking the Greeks' unity. Achilles, mad with rage, reached for his sword. Already he considered drawing it to slit the throat of the arrogant Agamemnon. But at that moment, Athena appeared behind him, invisible to others, and placed her divine hand on his shoulder. "Calm your anger, Achilles," said the goddess. "The gods love you, and your glory will surpass Agamemnon's. But if you strike today, you will lose the honor and respect of men. Withdraw, but swear not to fight for him again." Achilles trembled with fury, but obeyed the goddess. In a thunderous voice, he spat his contempt at Agamemnon's face. "Let the Achaeans manage without me. Never again will I raise my sword for your whims. You will see one day how much you depend on me, and you will beg for my return when the Trojans have broken your ranks." Then, beside himself, he stormed out of the assembly. Achilles' wrath was such that he withdrew to his tent, refusing to participate in the battles. There he sat on the shore, his eyes turned to the sea, and called upon his mother Thetis. She rose from the waves, radiant with marine light, and found her son overwhelmed by humiliation. "Mother," he said, "you who sit beside Zeus, help me. You know my destiny is short but glorious. If I must die young, I want at least the Achaeans to learn my worth. Go to Zeus and ask him to grant victory to the Trojans, so Agamemnon understands the error of offending me." Thetis, moved by her son's pain, promised to help. She ascended to Olympus and threw herself at Zeus's feet, begging him to grant Achilles' request. The king of the gods hesitated, fearing Hera's wrath, who favored the Greeks. But he yielded before the Nereids' tears. Thus, because of Agamemnon's affront, the Greeks lost their most powerful warrior. The clash of pride between two men would soon upset the balance of the entire war. In the days that followed, the Trojans gained the upper hand. Hector, son of Priam, led his men with courage, and the Achaeans buckled under his assaults. The cries of the wounded filled the air, the Greek ships burned, and despair spread through the ranks. All this because Achilles, in his wrath, refused to fight. But deep in his heart, another wound bled, the humiliation suffered before all, and his shattered pride. This was not merely a dispute over spoils, it was a war of honor, and Achilles, who lived for that honor, could not forgive. Thus began what the poets would later call the wrath of Achilles, the driving force of the Iliad, a source of both glory and misfortune. Part 2. The Greeks in Peril. The Achaean camp, deprived of Achilles and his Myrmidons, sank little by little into chaos. The quarrel with Agamemnon had opened a wound nothing could heal, and this internal injury weakened the entire army. The Greek warriors, once confident and united, felt their strength erode in the absence of their most fearsome champion. For if Achilles refused to fight, who could hold back Hector and the Trojans? The days darkened quickly. Hector, son of Priam, led his troops with courage and strategy worthy of the greatest kings. While Achilles brooded in his tent, Hector multiplied his assaults. The Trojans, once confined behind their walls, now dared to attack as far as the Greek ships. Their ardor grew as fear gripped the Achaeans. The first battles without Achilles already revealed the extent of the disaster. Ajax, the giant of Salamis, fought valiantly, his immense shield covering an entire army. Diomedes, son of Tydeus, battled with a rage inspired by Athena, even wounding gods like Ares and Aphrodite. But despite their bravery, Achilles' absence was felt like a gaping chasm. The Trojans no longer feared the Greeks as before. Agamemnon, consumed by pride, refused to admit his fault. But in his heart, he knew the quarrel with Achilles had weakened the entire expedition. Each evening, around the fires, warriors whispered, "If Achilles were here, Hector would never dare approach the ships." These murmurs spread, seeping into the tent of the king of Mycenae like needles pricking his pride. Meanwhile, Achilles remained withdrawn, arms crossed, his anger still burning. His Myrmidons, loyal but powerless, trained without joining the fray. Patroclus, worried, sometimes tried to convince him to return to battle, but the hero remained deaf. "Let them learn," he said. "Let them see what their king is worth without me. When flames lick their ships, they will remember my name." And the flames came. Hector, galvanized by the gods, launched an offensive of unprecedented violence. His chariots thundered across the battlefield, his spears pierced the Greek ranks, and his war cry sowed terror everywhere. The walls of Troy themselves seemed to rejoice in his strength. The Achaeans, cornered, retreated ceaselessly. Corpses piled up, arrows darkened the sky. Soon the fighting reached the wooden palisades built to protect the Greek ships. These fortifications, meant to keep the Trojans at bay, were breached under Hector's impetus. With a massive stone, he shattered one of the gates, and the Trojans surged toward the ships. The scent of burning torches filled the air, and flames began to lick the hulls. It was a disaster. The Greeks, gripped by panic, now fought to save their ships, their only means of returning to their homeland. Agamemnon, desperate, was wounded in battle and had to withdraw. Menelaus, his brother, wavered under the Trojans' force. Even Ajax, the Colossus, buckled under repeated assaults. The Trojans' war cries resounded like a rising tide, and for a moment it seemed the Achaeans would be annihilated. In his tent, Achilles heard these distant sounds, the clash of weapons, the screams of the dying, the crackle of flames on the ships. But he remained impassive, his anger toward Agamemnon still burning. The Myrmidons watched him with concern. Patroclus, however, could no longer bear this inaction. Meanwhile, the gods themselves were divided. Hera and Athena, furious at seeing the Greeks falter, tried to intervene. Poseidon, protector of the Achaeans, made the earth tremble to briefly push back the Trojans. But Zeus, faithful to his promise to Thetis, favored Troy to ensure Agamemnon's humiliation was complete. Thus, the immortals played their game, and mortals paid the price. The Greeks, driven to despair, sent an embassy to Achilles. Agamemnon, forced by defeat, offered immense gifts, treasures, lands, and even the return of Briseis, the captive whose seizure had sparked the quarrel. Odysseus, Ajax, and Phoenix, Achilles' old tutor, went to his tent to plead with him. They spoke at length, extolling honor, recalling glory, begging the hero to return. Odysseus used his cunning to flatter his pride. Ajax spoke as a straightforward warrior, and Phoenix, tears in his eyes, evoked his childhood. But Achilles remained unmoved. "No," he said, "I will not fight for Agamemnon again. Let him manage without me. Why sacrifice my life for a king who despises me? If I had the choice, I would return to Thessaly and live in peace. But I will not lend my arm to ingrates." The embassy failed. The Greeks left heavy-hearted, and the next night the Trojans set up camp in the open field, so close that their fires shone like a menacing constellation. Thus the Achaeans faced their darkest days. Their greatest warriors were wounded, their ships threatened, and their hearts undermined by fear. Only Achilles could have turned the tide of battle, but his wrath remained unyielding, his pride stronger than the distress of his allies. And yet, in this stubborn silence, an event was brewing that would change everything. Patroclus, Achilles' sole brother, would soon no longer bear to watch the Greeks perish before his eyes. His action, driven by friendship and despair, would pave the way for the most famous tragedy of the epic. The Greeks were in peril, but behind this threat loomed the tragedy to come, the death of Patroclus and the fury of Achilles. Part 3. The Death of Patroclus. The nights in the Achaean camp had become heavy and filled with anguish. The Trojan fires burned nearby, their red glow illuminating the horizon like ominous stars. Every Greek warrior knew that dawn might be their last, and prayers to the gods multiplied. But no plea could compensate for Achilles' absence, secluded in his tent, consumed by his resentment. Patroclus, however, could bear it no longer. For days he had watched the Achaeans fall, the ships burn, the cries of agony mingle with the clash of weapons. His heart bled with every moment, for he was bound to these men, these comrades in arms he could not save. Even more, he suffered to see his friend Achilles frozen in his anger, indifferent to the misfortunes of his brothers in arms. One night he entered Achilles' tent. The hero, seated by the shore, gazed at the silent sea, lyre in hand. His fingers plucked the strings as if to drown out the sound of war. Patroclus, unable to contain his emotion, approached. "Achilles," he said, "the Greeks die every day, and you remain here, motionless, prisoner of your pride. Is this the honor you boast of? You let Hector break our ranks, you watch our ships burn, and you do nothing." Achilles turned his eyes away, but his face hardened. "Do not think me unfeeling, Patroclus, but Agamemnon has insulted me. Let him fight without me, he who calls himself leader of the Achaeans. Let him finally understand how much he needs Achilles." Patroclus leaned toward him, his eyes filled with tears and anger. then lend me your armor. If you refuse to fight, let me at least bear your radiance. The Trojans, seeing your breastplate, will think you have returned. Their momentum will break, and perhaps we will save the ships." A long silence settled. Achilles scrutinized his friend's face, reading a fierce determination. In his heart he felt a stirring of unease, a painful premonition, but he finally relented. "So be it," he said. "You will wear my armor. But listen well, Patroclus. Do not pursue the Trojans too far. Be content with pushing them back from the ships. Do not seek out Hector, for he alone could defeat you. Swear to me you will respect this limit." Patroclus nodded, but in his eyes shone a flame that even Achilles did not fully comprehend. The next morning at dawn, Patroclus donned Achilles' gleaming armor. The Myrmidons, seeing the familiar silhouette of their master, believed he had finally abandoned his wrath. Their war cries resounded, filled with pride and joy. They did not know it was not Achilles leading the charge, but his soul brother. The battle that followed was electrifying. The Trojans, terrified at the thought that Achilles had returned, retreated in disarray. Patroclus, inflamed by this illusion, struck with his spear with supernatural vigor. The Myrmidons, galvanized, followed him like an unleashed wave. The flames were torn from the ships, and hope was reborn among the Greeks. Everywhere Achilles' name was shouted. Even the Trojans trembled, believing they saw the son of Thetis return from the underworld. Hector himself felt his heart waver, but soon the truth was revealed. It was not Achilles, but another wearing his armor, and yet this other fought with such rage that none dared stop him. Patroclus, intoxicated by victory, forgot his friend's warning. Instead of withdrawing after saving the ships, he pursued the Trojans to the very gates of Troy. His steps led him to the sacred walls, where no Greek should have ventured alone. There, Apollo, protector of the city, decided to intervene. Invisible, the god struck Patroclus in the back. Stunned, he dropped his shield, and his spear broke in his hand. At that moment, Hector charged at him. The Trojan prince, seeing the opportunity, drove his spear into the hero's body. Patroclus collapsed, his blood staining the red dust of the battlefield. With his last breath, he spoke to Hector. "You have defeated me, but it is not you who finishes me. It is Apollo who struck me, and it is Achilles who will take your life." These words were like a prophecy. Hector, triumphant, stripped Achilles' armor from Patroclus' body and donned it himself, unaware that he was sealing his own fate. When the news reached the Greek camp, a cry tore through the air. It was Achilles, upon learning of Patroclus' death, his heart shattered. His anger against Agamemnon, against the Achaeans, against the entire world, vanished in an instant before an infinite pain. He threw himself to the ground, covering his face with ashes, and his cries echoed all the way to Olympus. Thetis, rising from the waves, rushed to her son's side. She found Achilles collapsed, inconsolable. "My child," she said, stroking his hair, "I knew this day would come. You chose glory, and now the tragedy begins. But know that you will avenge Patroclus. Hephaestus will forge you a new armor more radiant than the one you lost, and with it you will defeat Hector. But Achilles in tears, replied, "What does my glory matter? What does my life matter if Patroclus is no longer at my side? I have only one desire now, to kill Hector and then join my friend at the gates of the underworld." Thus the destiny was sealed. The death of Patroclus broke Achilles' heart and rekindled his fury. From then on, he would no longer fight for the Greeks, nor for Agamemnon, nor for Helen. He would fight only for Patroclus, for the lost friendship, for vengeance, and this vengeance would soon set the battlefield ablaze like never before. Chapter 4. The Destiny Fulfilled. Part 1. The Return to Battle. The death of Patroclus had plunged the Achaean camp into an endless night. Every warrior knew that Achilles' friend was no ordinary man, and his loss heralded an even greater tragedy. But none could imagine the hurricane about to descend. For Achilles, until then locked in his anger against Agamemnon, now thought only of one thing: avenging Patroclus, even if it meant offering his own life to the gods. When Patroclus's body was brought back, covered in dust and blood, Achilles threw himself upon it. His cries resounded like thunderclaps. He kissed his friend's cold face, called his name, begged the gods to restore his breath. The Myrmidons wept around their master, striking their helmets and shields in mourning. But Achilles remained inconsolable. In this tumult of pain, Thetis rose from the waves, accompanied by her Nereid sisters. The sea parted like a veil to let her reach her son. She found Achilles covered in ashes, his face ravaged by tears. "My child," she said, "you knew this day would come. Patroclus has fallen, and you cannot escape your destiny. But listen to me. If you wish to avenge your friend, you must return to battle." "I know," Achilles replied, his voice broken. "I will fight, and I will kill Hector. But after that, I too will die. It matters little, as long as Patroclus is avenged." Thetis sighed. She knew her son had chosen the irrevocable path, so she decided to give him the weapon of his vengeance. She ascended to Olympus and went to the workshop of Hephaestus, the divine smith. In his blazing forges, where fire and metal united in a divine tumult, she begged the master of flames to forge a new armor for Achilles. Hephaestus agreed. He took bronze, gold, and silver, making them sing under his hammer. From his hands sprang a masterpiece. The breastplate shone like the rising sun. The helmet gleamed like a star in the night. The spear vibrated with superhuman power. But it was the shield that surpassed all understanding. On its surface, Hephaestus engraved the entire world. It depicted the earth and sea, the constellations, the sun and moon. 2 cities were shown, one at peace, with its festivals, marriages, and songs, the other at war, with its battles and fires, herds, harvests, dances, stars. All the universe lived on this circle of bronze. It was more than a weapon. It was a reflection of the cosmos, a mirror of destiny. When Thetis brought this armor to her son, the Myrmidons were dazzled. Achilles, donning it, seemed transfigured. A divine light surrounded him, and even the bravest warriors stepped back, seized with awe and admiration. The entire camp knew then that the hour of vengeance had come. Before setting out, Achilles summoned the Achaean leaders. Before Agamemnon, he spoke with a firm voice, but without hatred. King of Mycenae, our quarrels have led to this disaster. Patroclus is dead, and the Trojans threaten us. I will no longer fight for my glory, but to honor my friend. Let us forget our grudges. From now on, I take my place among the Achaeans again. Agamemnon, ashamed, admitted his fault. He returned Briseis to Achilles, untouched and respected. But the son of Thetis had no interest in such spoils. His only desire was to hurl himself into battle. Before departing, he organized Patroclus's funeral. A great pyre was built, and the body of the lost friend was placed amid fragrant wood. The Myrmidons cut their hair in mourning. Achilles, for his part, solemnly vowed, Patroclus, I will not rest until I have offered your vengeance. Hector, who killed you, will know neither peace nor glory. His flesh will be prey for dogs and birds. These words chilled the assembly, for in Achilles' voice was no longer just the pain of a man, but the fury of a being almost divine. When the next day dawned, Achilles donned his new armor. The sun reflected off its bronze plates like a golden mirror. The Myrmidons gathered behind him, struck their spears against their shields. The ground trembled under their steps. Then Achilles mounted his chariot, drawn by his mortal horses, Xanthus and Balius. These beasts, given by the gods, neighed with human voices, and one of them, Xanthus, suddenly spoke. Achilles, we will carry you to victory, but know this, your hour approaches. The hero shuddered. Even the animals foretold his imminent death. But far from frightening him, this prophecy galvanized him. He raised his spear to the sky and cried, Let the Trojans know that Achilles has returned. His cry echoed across the entire battlefield. The Greeks regained hope, the Trojans trembled, and Hector himself, from atop his walls, knew the decisive hour was near. Thus, after months of withdrawal, Achilles returned to battle, no longer for Agamemnon, nor for glory, but for the lost friendship and vengeance. And already the gods, hovering above the battlefield, held their breath. For the clash between Achilles and Hector would decide Troy's fate and forever engrave the legend of the greatest of heroes. Part 2. The Duel with Hector. Achilles' return to the battlefield was like a tempest. The Greeks, who the day before mourned Patroclus' loss, rose with renewed vigor. The Trojans, meanwhile, felt their courage waver. For Achilles' name was not merely that of a man, it was a force, a shadow, a thunder, and that thunder was crashing down on them again. The hero's wrath erupted the moment he entered the fray. His spear struck without respite, his blows resounded like lightning, and none could withstand his blazing gaze. Warriors fell by the dozens under his fury, and even the river Scamander, swollen with the blood of the dead, tried to engulf him. But Achilles, aided by the gods, survived this revolt of the waters. It was no longer a man fighting, but an incarnation of vengeance. All knew his goal was one alone. Hector, the prince of Troy, the son of Priam, who had killed Patroclus and donned his armor, had to pay. Every step of Achilles, every war cry, resounded as a herald of this inevitable duel. Hector, however, was no coward. He had led his men with courage throughout the war and never retreated before an opponent. But that day, seeing Achilles approach, clad in the armor forged by Hephaestus, a new terror stirred in his heart. The gods themselves seemed to have abandoned Troy. Priam from the walls begged his son to return to the city. Hecuba, his mother, showed her breast and pleaded with him not to face the son of Thetis. But Hector, torn between fear and honor, refused. "If I hide," he said, "I will live without glory. I would rather face Achilles, even if death awaits me." Yet when the hero finally approached, Hector yielded to the instinct of survival. Seeing Achilles, swift as a flame, he turned and fled, running around the walls of Troy. 3 times the 2 men circled the city under the stunned gazes of the soldiers massed on the ramparts. Achilles, tireless, pursued Hector like a falcon its prey, his steps resounding on the sacred ground. Then Athena, disguised as Hector's brother, appeared to deceive him. She promised to aid him in battle. Tricked by the goddess, Hector regained courage and stopped, resolved to face his foe. The duel began. Hector hurled his spear, but it lodged in Achilles' shield without piercing it. Achilles, implacable, retaliated. His spear, forged by the gods, flew like a ray of light. Hector dodged it narrowly, but Athena, invisible, returned the weapon to Achilles. Then the hero advanced. Terrible! Hector understood his hour had come. With his last breath, he spoke. "I know I will die, Achilles, but at least promise me you will return my body to my father, that it not be prey for dogs." But Achilles, consumed by rage, refused. "Dog, you killed Patroclus. Your body will be devoured by beasts, and your name erased in ignominy." Then, with a blinding strike, he drove his spear into Hector's throat. The prince of Troy collapsed, his blood flowing onto the earth. His eyes clouded, and his final gaze was for his city, which he knew was doomed. Hector's death was an earthquake. Cries of anguish rose from Troy's walls. Priam collapsed. Hecuba covered herself in ashes, and Andromache, Hector's wife, fainted at the sight of her husband's body dragged from the walls. For Achilles, not content with his victory, tied Hector's corpse behind his chariot and dragged it through the dust around the city. His desire for vengeance had made him implacable, almost inhuman. The gods themselves shuddered at such cruelty. Zeus at last ordered that the body be returned to Priam one day, but for now, Achilles' wrath knew no bounds. Thus ended the most famous duel in history. Hector, the bulwark of Troy, lay in the dust, and Achilles, the greatest of heroes, triumphed in rage. But all knew this triumph was also a condemnation, for in killing Hector, Achilles had taken the final step of his destiny. His glory was now eternal, but his life hung by a thread, and already in the heavens Apollo was preparing Paris's bow. For if Hector had fallen, the hour would soon come when Achilles, too, would pay the price of his glory. Part 3. The Death of Achilles. Hector's body lay lifeless, dragged in the dust by Achilles' chariot. Troy's walls still echoed with cries of mourning, and the Trojans' pain filled the air like a funereal veil. For the Greeks, it was a dazzling victory, but all knew it was not the end, for if Hector had fallen, Troy still stood, and Achilles' destiny was not yet sealed. Achilles remained consumed by his rage and pain. Each day he dragged Hector's corpse around Patroclus' tomb, as if to feed his friend's shade with eternal vengeance. But the gods, weary of this spectacle, ordered the body be returned. Priam, king of Troy, came himself to the hero's tent, guided by Hermes. A broken old man, he embraced Achilles' knees, wept, and pleaded, "Remember your father Achilles. I too have lost my son. Give me Hector, that I may give him a worthy burial." At these words, Achilles' fury broke for a moment. In Priam he saw the image of Peleus, his own father, whom he would never see again. Moved, he returned Hector's body, and the two enemies shared a meal of tears and silence. But this moment of respite did not erase the truth. Achilles had crossed the threshold of his destiny. The war continued. The Greeks, emboldened, multiplied their assaults. But the gods, divided, still played their game. Poseidon and Hera supported the Achaeans. Aphrodite and Apollo protected Troy. Amid this tumult, Achilles shone like a star destined to fade. Wherever he appeared, the Trojans retreated. His steps were those of a vengeful god. His spear felled the bravest, and none could stop him. But the hour was approaching. The immortals themselves had reminded that Achilles' glory would be brief. Apollo, irritated by the hero's arrogance, decided to hasten his end. He turned to Paris, the Trojan prince, the very one whose love for Helen had sparked the war. Paris was not a formidable warrior, but he wielded the bow with skill. Apollo guided his hand. One morning, as Achilles pursued the Trojans to their very walls, Paris, hidden behind a rampart, drew his bow. The arrow hissed through the air, swifter than the wind. Apollo guided it, and it struck the hero's sole vulnerable point, his heel, where Thetis had held him during his baptism in the Styx. The impact was shattering. Achilles staggered, surprised more than wounded at first. But soon a searing pain coursed through his body. Blood gushed, and he understood his hour had come. His legs buckled, and the ground resounded with his fall. The Greeks rushed to protect him, driving back the Trojans who sought to seize his body. Ajax, the giant, stood like a wall, shielding the wounded hero with his shield. Odysseus ordered that Achilles be carried from the battlefield, but already his eyes were fading. With his last breath, Achilles spoke to his companions. "Do not fear. I knew this day would come. I chose this glory, and I regret nothing. Remember me, not for my death, but for my strength and my honor." Then, turning his thoughts to Patroclus, he murmured, "Soon I will join you, brother." His eyes closed, and silence fell over the camp. Achilles' death was an earthquake for both Achaeans and Trojans. The Greeks lost their greatest champion, whose mere presence struck fear. The Trojans, meanwhile, understood that even glory did not shield from death, and that the hand of the gods always decided the fate of men. The funeral was grandiose. On an immense pyre, the Greeks placed the hero's body, Adorned with his divine armor, the Myrmidons cut their hair in mourning as they had for Patroclus. Achilles' horses, it is said, bowed their heads and wept real tears. On the pyre they also placed Hector's weapons so that vengeance might be complete even in death. The flames rose to the sky, and the smoke ascended like an offering to the gods. Then his ashes were collected in a golden urn, placed beside those of Patroclus. Thus, in death as in life, the two friends were never parted. After his death, Achilles' legend spread like wildfire. Poets sang his glory, temples raised his name, and his image was etched in the memory of men. Centuries passed, but his radiance never dimmed, for Achilles, more than a warrior, became the symbol of the human condition, the blazing brilliance of a brief but immortal life in memory. And he was always remembered as the swiftest, the most valiant, the most tragic of heroes, a man who chose eternal glory over the safety of oblivion and paid for that choice with his blood. Achilles was not merely a warrior. He was the explosive meeting of the human and the divine, between the fragility of men and the immortal radiance of gods. His ardent character, marked by pride, passion, and anger, made him both admirable and fearsome. His fury could destroy entire armies, but his heart, bound to Patroclus, also revealed a deep fidelity and sensitivity. His exploits on the battlefield surpassed those of all others. He was the lightning that struck the Trojans, the shadow looming over their walls. No warrior could resist him, and even the gods at times had to fear him. His strength lay not only in his arm or his spear, but in his unyielding will to leave an indelible mark. But what makes Achilles an eternal figure is not only his power, it is his choice. Knowing his life would be brief, he accepted death in youth to embrace glory. He thus embodied the dilemma of every human being, to live long in the shadows or to shine intensely, even if it means fading too soon. A symbol of the human condition, Achilles reminds us that greatness often arises in pain, that glory comes at the cost of sacrifice, and that memory is more powerful than duration. His name, crossing the ages, remains today the emblem of the hero par excellence, invincible by arms, vulnerable by a detail, but immortal by his legend. In a future video, we will delve into the heart of the Trojan War and its many significant protagonists. A siege that lasted 10 long years, with incredible exploits from both sides. Thank you for joining me tonight on this journey through history. I hope this tale has brought you peace and wonder. Don't forget to subscribe to Twilight Tales for more stories to guide you into a serene sleep. Take care, and see you soon.